Imagine this, if you will. You're just a parent, trying to do what you can to keep your kids happy, healthy, and hopefully develop skills that not only allow them to survive in life, but also thrive in it. And one of those ways for your kids to gain those particular type of skills is also through hobbies, such as joining a soccer ball team, or perhaps joining a football team. Perhaps your kids have more talents and instruments, so you get them to join a possible school band or something of that extent. And for a time, you just went through this routine, doing what you usually do and allowing your kids to get involved in these particular hobbies. And after some time, something unexpected happened. It turns out that someone who happens to be a part of your kids' hobbies, whether that might be a friend or perhaps someone who runs the place, maybe a coach for a football team or an adult who runs the school's band, turns out to be a vicious child molester. And now you may be asking, how did this pedophile go this long without being detected? Well, simply put, the reason he was undetected was because he simply moved to a different country. His country of origin, although have a record of him and his history of pedophilia, allowed him to move to an entirely different country, unimpeded and unchecked. In short, they just didn't care. They were all fine and dandy with letting a pedophile run wild in another country. So that's what we're talking about today. A story of a very dangerous pedophile getting away from the law, mostly because the cops just didn't fucking care. In other words, an absolute shit show of police negligence. So with no more beating around the bush, let's just dig right into the case, shall we? So today's story comes from an article from a website known as Mirror Online, and this is the title of the story. UK pedophile pictured with unsuspecting kids in Vietnam after prison release. Yep, and just like that I can tell this article is going to be one hell of a fucking shit show. British pedophile Christopher Trinnaman grins as he stands surrounded by unsuspecting kids in his new home of Vietnam. The twisted trombone player, 41, moved to the Southeast Asian country after he was released from jail in 2015 and signed up with a top orchestra. British authority says the fiend, a registered sex offender here but living unchecked in Vietnam, has done nothing wrong by going there. And before we continue on the article, I recommend that you keep what the British authorities have claimed saved in the back of your mind, because trust me, it will be important later. But one of his victims slammed the snap posted on Facebook just before Christmas as disgusting and said it's appalling. Why was he allowed to travel abroad? He was a very manipulative man who is a danger to children. I will always remember what he did to me. It will always stay with me. Trinnaman targeted her online aged 13, grooming her along with a girl of 14, and she testified at his trial. The victim, who cannot be named for legal reasons, said, "We were so vulnerable, and he preyed on that. It's disgusting. He is free to go abroad with no monitoring. It's appalling. He lives in Vietnam with children. He must be stopped from doing this to anyone else." After he was jailed for grooming the teen and her friend, Trinnaman was described as high risk and made the subject of a sexual harm prevention order, restricting contact with children and web use. But it couldn't stop him traveling abroad, and we exposed Trinnaman's life in Vietnam just weeks after we revealed how thousands of sex offenders are free to roam abroad.
Excuse me, what?
The Sunday People told how courts have handed out over 15,000 sexual harm prevention orders in 3 years, but only 27 had foreign travel restrictions. Trinnaman had played to large crowds at Vietnamese National Academy of Music. There is no suggestion that he has acted inappropriately or broken any laws since moving to Vietnam after his 2015 prison release. Okay, so let's really dissect this bullshit, shall we? Now, clearly, none of this makes any sense to me. Granted, in most situations, I would usually chalk that up to my ignorance of the UK law, generally because I'm an American. I don't live in the UK, and it's not my priority to learn the UK law when I don't live there. However, if you are someone who actually does live in the UK, or you actually know a fair share of your information about UK law, then by all means, feel free to relay that information and explain to me, a uneducated burger-loving American, about what the hell is going on here. However, even though I'm fairly ignorant about UK's laws, I don't understand how in any circumstances that these numbers make any sense whatsoever. You're telling me that in the last 3 years there was over 15,000 sexual harm prevention orders made. 27 of those had any relation to travel bans. So the question is, what does it take to get a travel ban from a sexual harm prevention order? And why is someone like Trinnaman not even remotely considered to have that kind of ban on him? After all, virtually everyone, including the police themselves, admit that Trinnaman is a huge threat to children. Yet for some reason, no one had a thought at all that maybe he would try to move to an entirely new country to avoid the consequences of his own actions? And for some reason, no one thought maybe it might be a wise decision to restrict his ability to move to an entirely new nation. What makes this even worse is that ever since Trinnaman moved on to Vietnam, he was able to get a job at working at a national academy of music in the nation of Vietnam, meaning that virtually all that effort from his victims at the UK to take him down and get, well, their justice for what happened to them, it's all for nothing because he just moved to an entirely new nation and avoided all the consequences of it. So before I lose myself to another one of my tangents, let's just move on to the article and just examine it further because it gets worse and worse. Trust me, there's still plenty to go through. Catherine Mulhern, boss of children's rights charity ECPAT UK, said, under the current framework, law enforcement are unable to apply for a restriction on foreign travel for child sex offenders such as Trinnaman, if, at the time they applied for a civil order, there was no evidence to suggest that he would travel abroad. Well, Catherine, I'm gonna have to say I disagree with you. I don't think you require a lot of evidence, if any at all, to suggest that he could possibly, I don't know, leave an entire country to go to a new one just to avoid the consequences of his actions. It doesn't require any real evidence at all. It just requires foresight and common sense, something that apparently seems to be very lacking in the entirety of UK's law enforcement. Anyway, I digress. Let's return to the topic. We need more preventative tools to target offenders who begin their trajectory of abuse online and are considered low risk, but whose offending will continue to escalate, and they will seek to travel abroad to offend with impunity. Yeah, that's true. You know how you can prevent that from happening? You can give someone like Trinnaman a complete total ban on traveling to an entirely new fucking country. You can revoke his passports. It may not be much in terms of the long term, but hey, baby steps is very important when it comes down to dealing with situations like this. Just allowing him to just up and leave the country with absolutely no resistance is fucking ridiculous. Something tells me that's not gonna happen anytime soon though, so, well, fuck me for even trying. Anyway, let's get back to the topic at hand. Trinnaman sparked a manhunt in 2009 after he fled 24 hours before he was due to stand trial. He had posed as a teen online and persuaded the two girls to send naked pictures before trying to lure one into a hotel for sex. Police were alerted and found 28 indecent images of kids on his computer in a search of his home. In 2010, Trinnaman, formerly of Dulwich, southeast London, was jailed for 4 years in his absence at the Old Bailey for causing or inciting a child to engage in sexual activity in 2008 and possessing indecent images. So what we can get from this is that he has a clear history of being a disgusting pedophile, but he's also fairly meticulous. The idea that he would go as far as to pose as a teen online to catfish little girls for images and try as he can to cover himself from the eyes of the law really shows you that he's not entirely your typical pedophile. If anyone who's hang around my series of videos exposing pedophiles, you would know that most of them aren't very smart people in general and tend to be very good at exposing themselves to the world, more often than not. For Trinnaman's case though, that doesn't seem to be the case at all. He's very much a meticulous and dangerous man, and it's no wonder and no exaggeration that he's considered high risk, which just makes the situation even more fucked up given that he was allowed to move to Vietnam to begin with. I know, I'm kind of harping on that particular point, but I think it's important to realize just how fucked up this whole situation is. Trinnaman is an example of a kind of dangerous person that you should never ignore. Also, can we just sit here and mention for a real quick minute and just talk about the fact that he's been in jail at one point only for 4 years after him getting caught with 28 indecent pictures of children, grooming 2 young little girls who are not even anywhere close to being adults yet, and trying to get one of them to have sex with him in a hotel. Yet you're telling me that's worth 4 years in jail. See, that doesn't make any fucking sense at all. It just doesn't to me. Like, how do you do all that and only get 4 years? It's like this guy just gets nothing but slaps on the wrists. Seriously. None of this shit makes any sense whatsoever. Again, before I get myself lost into another one of my massive tangents, let's just move on to the article. We still have just a bit more to go. So let's keep pushing. He was also ordered to sign on to the sex offenders register for life. Trinnaman was caught in 2011, and within days of leaving HMP Littlehay, he failed to register with police. Scotland Yard said he was high risk and revealed the sexual harm prevention order restricted his internet use and his contact with girls under 18. Trinnaman tried to overturn his conviction, arguing that the prosecution defied his rights to freedom of expression under Article 10 of the Human Rights Convention.
Shut the fuck up, you cunt!
Oh, for fuck's sakes, go and fuck yourself, you disgusting sack of shit. You have no fucking rights to sit here and preach about my human rights when you had no problem violating the human rights of little girls. You were the one catfishing them to get nudes out of them. You stored CP on your fucking computer. And even worse, you were grooming these little girls too. You were trying to train them into becoming just tools, sex toys for you to use and discard at your leisure. So fuck off. It gets really frustrating dealing with these pedophiles half the time, especially with the show that I've had for at least around mid to late summer. And it's always something with these pedophiles. They always love hiding behind freedom of expression and whatnot in order to justify their actions, despite the fact that they were blatantly, in this particular case, especially in Trinnaman's case, violating children's rights. So fuck them. Jesus Christ, what a delusional sack of shit. Christopher, you don't deserve rights. You absolutely forfeited them as soon as you decided to try to touch a child. As soon as you extracted sexual pictures from kids to store them in your disgusting computer. As soon as you started grooming these kids and trying to turn them into your fucking sex toys is the exact fucking moment. At that point, your rights are null and void. Fuck you. Anyway, excuse me for the tangents. Let's get back to the article at hand. But 3 senior judges at London's Criminal Appeal Court dismissed his bid, saying it had no merit. Well, at least there's something me and the British court system could agree on. The people understands Trinnaman's 14-year-old victim has since taken her own life. So not only is he a disgusting child molester, he's partially responsible for a girl's suicide. Jesus fucking Christ. The other victim revealed how he texted photos of his private parts and tried to meet her for sex, saying he loved her. She said, "I was young and naive and didn't understand the severity of it. I didn't appreciate how terrible it was." Although pedofags like Amos Yee, Stetson Hardwick, Daniel Romanis, and a variety of other creeps that I've been talking about on my show and argued against in my show, always love to make the claims that in their minds, kids can consent to sex with older adults, which, of course, it's flat out fucking wrong, and this entire situation is a great example of that. 2 victims, the one that is currently alive, is recounting what happened to her and showed that she did not understand what was going on with her. She didn't really understand of how wrong it was until it was far too late to say so, and she got exploited for it. Very fortunately for her, she didn't meet up with him. Thankfully, it didn't go that far. However, from what I can see from the article, she apparently was exploited with her nudes. So, that is unfortunate. But this is the exact thing that happens all the time with these pedophiles. They love to advocate for the idea that they think kids consent to sexual actions with adults. And as a result, one of the little victims is dead, and the other one is traumatized for life. This is why people like Amos and all the rest of those disgusting pedophiles who call themselves MAPS need to be opposed at all costs, but that's a rant for another time. I don't need to go off of too much of a rant anyway, so let's get back to the article in hand. Now I know he was preying on the vulnerable. He tried to pretend he cared for us, but he was disgusting. In 2010, the people spoke to Trinnaman's victim in a bid to track him down while he was on the run. Even then, her father feared him traveling abroad. He said, "It's absolutely ridiculous that someone facing pedophile charges and given bail while awaiting trial is allowed to hold on to their passports." Fucking exactly, thank you. It would seem such a simple thing to make them surrender their passports as a condition of their bail. The other concern is that they could abuse children abroad and be under the radar. Well, yeah, that's exactly the problem, isn't it? We told the Metropolitan Police of our findings, and a spokesperson for the force said, "A sexual harm prevention order is an order made by the court, and the conditions imposed on this court do not prevent travel abroad. No conditions have been breached." Well, the question has to be then, what conditions need to exist or be broken in order for a travel ban to take place? Because it seems like it just doesn't make any sense as to why someone like him is still allowed to travel. It just doesn't make any practical sense whatsoever. But then again, I guess that's never going to change, because it seems like here the cops just don't fucking care and are not going to remotely budge in this particular topic. A spokeswoman for Trinnaman's orchestra said last night, Christopher John Trinnaman used to work at the Sun Symphony Orchestra as an associate principal trombone. On April 23rd, due to his personal reasons, Mr. Trinnaman resigned from the position and terminated a labor contract with Sun Symphony Orchestra. Sun Symphony Orchestra did not know anything about his past. All the necessary information he provided to sign the labor contract was legal. Well, the company's going to do what the company's going to do to cover their asses, right? Trinnaman's case came just weeks after a 5-day hearing of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse exposed failures by our authorities to tackle child sex abuse. Experts highlighted a rising number of incidences where UK national video victims over the internet, and ECPAT has been called for known abusers to be barred from leaving the UK. Britain has laws to stop convicted sex beasts traveling abroad and abusing kids, but it is claimed these measures are not working. Police can apply to magistrate for a foreign travel order, but child protection groups complain the bans are too difficult to secure. This is because a magistrate requires specific evidence that a sex offender has intent to commit a crime. Previously, we identified a catalog of predators who have fled to countries where the child sex trade is rife and are wanted by police in the UK. They include disgraced former pop star Gary Glitter, 74, who traveled to Vietnam to abuse girls aged 10 and 11, despite being convicted of child sex offenses in 1999. He had a travel ban lifted in 2011, but was jailed for 16 years in 2015 for abusing 3 girls. The list goes on, but I think you get the idea. As this article has stated, and what I'm figuring from reading into this information, is that there's a huge pedophile problem in the UK, and that they seem to have a very easy time moving to an entirely different nation where the laws are a lot more different and they could be allowed to do whatever they want, or that not being the case, but perhaps the black market is massive and the police can't do anything about it. Strangely enough, though, that doesn't mean that Trinnaman is without reach or ability to contact. Apparently, Trinnaman has a huge thing on being on Twitter and is there quite consistently, so let's give that a look. Christopher Trinnaman, at Team Trinnaman, the first Briton since witchcraft trials to be jailed on an accusation of criminal speech without any supporting evidence. What an interesting view of yourself. I think there's a way you can improve that bio, though. How about you call yourself a disgusting little child molester that ran all the way to an entirely new country just to avoid the law, and definitely deserves what it feels like to be thrown into a Vietnam-era style trap laced with shit. Now, you may be asking, what exactly is his activity on Twitter like? And does he even actually mention the things he said and done? Yes, in a way, he kind of has, because people have called him out plenty of times in the past, and would even talk about the things he said and done, forcing him to acknowledge it, even though he tries to lie and weasel his way out of it. He also tends to get into a lot of spats about the topic of pedophilia, and he likes to use every single disingenuous tactic and card up his sleeve whenever you have a conversation with him. Plenty of people will argue with him constantly only for him to continue to play the victim card about himself and pedophiles in general over and over and over again, claiming that when people come after him, that they are punishing him for a evil speech crime or criminal speech. Not only that, but he fairly is consistent with his interactions with the rest of the so-called map community. Now, if you may be asking, what the fuck are maps, Kaz? It sounds like you're bitching about a community of people who like literal fucking maps to know where they are. No. We're talking about maps as in minor attractive persons. An entire community of pedophiles who try to rebrand what it means to be a pedophile in order to push their disgusting agenda. Trust me, I'll talk about that pretty soon. I have a video in the works discussing that particular disgusting bit of internet lore, we're just going to say. So expect something like that on a later date. And speaking of all this crazy stuff and mentions and what have you, I would like to give a shout out to Fun and Review, since he brought this particular story to my attention. He brought me the article and discussed about Mr. Trinnaman's past. Thanks to Fun and Review, I figured out who Trinnaman is and decided, you know what, making a video about him is important just as much as anyone else I'm talking about. So thank you, Mr. Fun and Review, because without you, I wouldn't even known Trinnaman existed to begin with. And although I spent a month being very inactive on YouTube, rest assured that it didn't mean that I was ignoring your request, merely that I was busy, but I'm trying my best to keep up with real life and internet stuff as balanced as possible. And giving you a shout out would be the least I can do to repay you for the fact that you brought me this particular interesting story to talk about. If you want to see Fun and Review's own video about the topic, then by all means, I'll definitely post his link in the description of the video down below. Now it's time for my last and final words about this particular topic before ending the video for good. As I've said from the very beginning of this video, this whole situation is a clusterfuck of epic proportions. Like an onion, it has a multitude of different layers of just rotting shit, blood, and pus. None of which is stopping or getting any better anytime soon. And although people tried their best to take this man down and give him the punishment that he deserves for what he's said and done to kids, all of it in a strange way didn't even matter in the end, because he managed to move to an entirely different country, in this case Vietnam, and he can do whatever he wants now, and there's nothing that the UK police or the people in the UK can do anything about it. In short, he got away with some serious crimes, and nothing's probably going to happen as a result. One victim is traumatized for life and the other is dead. She killed herself. Everyone and their mother tried to corner him, but he just moved to another nation just to avoid the consequences of his actions. And the police don't seem to care. They seem to treat it as, well, if he's over there, then they don't need to care about him anymore. They treat it as if it's okay for him to move to an entirely different country, knowing full well as to why he's doing it. After all, apparently, people who make Nazi pug jokes and, God forbid, edgy opinions on the internet are far more dangerous than a spazzy child molester who had an opportunity to ruin 2 girls for life. Although he probably is likely very possibly, at least in some way, responsible for the suicide of one of them, so. But apparently those edgy Nazi pugs need to be shut down in some way, right? Regardless, this just shows how absolutely fucked up this whole situation is. Especially when you take it to a larger context outside of Trinnaman. For example, in the end of the article, it mentions a whole bunch of different names and well-known pedophiles who have got caught with the law for what they've done to kids, only for them to move to an entirely different nation just to avoid the punishment of their crimes. And this is a very common thing. This is not some isolated incident. This is a thing that's been happening constantly for quite so many years now. And although this has been going far longer than Trinnaman, the police still don't care for whatever reason. And it really shows you that even though that the entire purpose of my Pedo Hunt series is to be as entertaining and informative as possible, it really is hard to make light of a situation like this. And it goes to show you that not everything that will be covered on the show is all funny, laughy, and full of memes. Sometimes there are some truly dark things that do happen, and will need to be talked about in order for people to understand that this is a thing. That things like this need to be called out. And if you're willing to stomach it, then by all means, welcome aboard. Because here in the Pedo Hunt, things can get quite dark sometimes, and not every story will have a happy ending. If you happen to like this video, then by all means, like, comment, share, and if you're so inclined, feel free to subscribe. If anything happens to my YouTube channel, you can still find me in BitChute, Gab, Minds.com, and DLive. If you really wish to help join the war efforts of my war against the pedophiles, and even have potential targets for me to go after, you can always contact me through Twitter or join my Discord server. Any contribution that you happen to make to my war efforts, regardless if that is small or huge, will be greatly appreciated. After all, the only reason that this channel has lasted as long in this massive war of attrition against the pedophiles is because of the massively generous support of my viewers. Thank you all, and I hope you have a good night. See you back in the front lines soon enough.